Good day, welcome back. Today, next video in my series on World Chess Championship blunders, we're looking at the 2016 match between Carlsen and Karjakin. I think this match and the next one are well known or regarded as being quite dry, and actually not many blunders. There was only 2 decisive games in this match in the main section, and in 2018, of course, it was all draws. So the standards, the bar has been set very high, and so the blunders I look at maybe wouldn't have qualified in previous videos, and some of the quite subtle, not really sort of above my pay grade, but we'll go and have a look at them anyway. So let's just move across the capture screen. So this is the World Chess Championship cycle 2016 candidates tournament as usual, and you look at the players and the candidates: Karjakin, Caruana, Anand. Last time we'll see him. Actually, he got pretty close, only off by a point. Svidler, Aronian, Giri, Nakamura, and Topalov. And this was quite famous because Karjakin and Caruana came into the last round on even points, 7.5, but Caruana, because Tiebreaks, had to win with black. And hey, maybe he could have, but he didn't in the end. So Karjakin qualified, and then, kind of the reverse happened in the next tournament when Caruana qualified. But quite curious looking at the ratings of these people going into it. It's just somehow a bit like the current candidates. You got very high-rated Fabiano and Hikaru, who probably, maybe Fabiano was the favorite going in. He also had Aronian quite highly rated. Of course, neither of them made it, and the seed, second lowest seed, actually won the tournament. We'll close that. We're going to look at 3 games today. Game 3, where there was a couple of offsetting blunders, got it up on the board at the moment, which ended up a draw. Game 8, where Carlsen went a bit on tilt mode, and he lost that game. Game 9, actually, when Carlsen equalised, didn't really see any big blunders in that. And then finally, we're going to look at the high break game number 3, where Karjakin blundered in time travel, so it's a bit unfair. But basically, that was the game which determined that Carlsen would retain his title. Okay, so here we are. I've got game 3 up on the screen, and you can see a couple of possible moves suggested there. We'll go back a move or two. You can see this position. There's a good video by Daniel King. I just rewatched his video to get a sense of this, and I think the main point here is that Black's objective is to pick up both white pawns, and then he'll have a draw on rook and knight versus rook endgame. So you've got to bear that in mind the whole time. Now, according to the engines, rook e8 is a winning move. So we're going to do this in a little bit more detail, just from an endgame perspective, because what would happen if you came into this position in your own games? How would you play it? You're obviously trying to keep that one last pawn alive. So let's see how rook e8, we'll just go through a line here, rook e8 does that. So f pawn drops. Okay, now you've got to protect the b3 pawn, and we're doing it. This knight move does it by tactics, because obviously a fork is threatened, so black can't take that b pawn yet. So maneuver the rook to a better position, use the check. And at this point, having the king cut off can be useful. And the other thing, black's got counterplay with h pawn. So these are all the sorts of things to sort of bear in mind. Check. Go through this quickly. So step 1 is pick up the h pawn. Done that. Now we need to make sure that we can hold the b pawn. And obviously, white can use the king to hold the rook on the 3rd rank. So therefore, we get the check first. King moves across. Now we attack the pawn. Pawn can be defended from behind. And then I think now it's just a gradual process of using tactics to not easy this. We finally picked up the b pawn, and then this will be a winning position. So that's going all the way back here. Rook e8 was supposed to be the winning move. Okay, so let's move on now to what was played. Knight e6 gives away all the advantage. Now it's a question of what black should do. Okay, king takes f5 was played in the game. I just put in my own line, rook takes b3 loses, and we'll look at that in a second. And then the drawing line would have been rook to c3, attacking the knight, which is guarding the rook, and that kind of ties white down. So let's have a look at first. We'll do this move, and this fails with tactics. Rook check, take the pawn, knight check, and it's the same fork. And the problem is that the king, because it's check, the king has to move away from attacking the rook, so the rook drops, and that's game over. 6. Let's quick look at the drawing line. Rook c3 attacks the knight. So rook needs to move, so the knight can move. Check. King takes f5, drops again. Check. Guarding the pawn. Take the h pawn. All good. Attack the knight again. So realistically, knight has to move. Knight move. Check. Attack the knight. Attack the knight. And there's tactics here that if the rooks get swapped off, the knight's in a compromised position. The b3 pawn will drop. Just show that I didn't have it loaded up. 62, knight a2, only move. King c2, check, and check. That's a draw. Attack the knight. And basically you have this repetition of playing rook to d2. Rook has to go away. And rook back to d1. I mean, otherwise the king's probably going to come in. The knight's, let's just have a look at it. We just attack the pawn. Can't be defended except by moving the knight back there, and then you get a repetition of position. Okay, so that should be rook c3 draws as well. So what's the difference with king takes f5, which is supposed to be losing? Now Carlsen guards his a pawn, that obviously had to do that. Rook h1, that's a good move. Now this is where Carlsen gave the advantage back. Winning move, rook f7 check, and you'll see the difference. The black king gets driven away. Let's go through a sample line. The idea is the white king gets back and can round up the h pawn. And you can see that white's been able to keep his b pawn. So what happens when b7 is played as in the game? Attack the knight, defend the knight, gets the black b pawn. Now the black h pawn is too dangerous. In fact, I agree to draw there. I'm not going to say that's a bad blunder, but that was quite interesting. Those sort of turns in that endgame. And the reason why I found that so interesting is that this would be in a table base. It's got a few enough pieces, right? You really got to think about, what just one slightly wrong positioning of the knight or the rook makes complete difference to the outcome of the game. And so that game was drawn. Okay, so now let's move along to game number 8, which really was basically a case of just Magnus overdoing it. So let me bring up the chart. Okay, you can have a look at the bottom right chart there, and you can see there's actually a couple of blunders. First of all, Karjakin had possibly a winning edge about move 35. He didn't take it, and then Carlsen just fell apart, which is quite unusual for him, close to move 50. Let's go to that first a little bit. It's interesting in its own right. This position here, where White's already one pawn down, but he's obviously got some attacking chances and compensation. Computer thinks it's fairly even. Now that's the blunder. Should just play rook d7. Any number of moves draw. But what happens when he played c5 is that rooks come off. Black's now 2 pawns ahead, and they're very dangerous looking pawns too. Queen d6, attacking the backward of them, and then queen a4 is winning, because in the game it went queen d3, but if you go queen a4, logically let's grab that pawn, so back down 1 pawn advantage, but black can just solidify everything on his king side, and eventually that extra pawn is important. Let's say continue the line. Yeah. Just quickly, the main problem is that white doesn't have any sort of counterplay, so that's advantage black. But Karjakin actually played queen d3, so now we have this drawing motif, check, check, picks up the knight, and now we're back to a fairly balanced position, because the difference to the previous position is black's king is totally exposed. So there shouldn't be enough winning chances here. In fact, the pawns are back down to even now. Now what we're going to do is going to flick forwards to the sort of the key mistake towards the end of the game. Which, this position here, it looks fairly even. In fact, white's a pawn up. Black has enough counterplay based on his advanced a pawn. And what Carlsen should do is h4 or queen b7 check, but queen e6 loses too. It's a really tricky tactic here. It's based on this h5, because now how can the white queen check the black king? Those squares are all covered. That pawn move has just covered that square. So the white queen doesn't have any checking squares at all. which is kind of unusual. And then h4 doesn't really achieve anything. a2, late in the game, and then Carlsen resigned. So let's see what happens. Put us up the pawn. Queen advances. Take the pawn off. Check. Now there's the forced mating sequence. Bishop f3 is given. Knight f2 check. The white king is getting mated, but let's say the logical thing. We can't check on this square, but maybe we can check on a7 check. No, that square's covered too. So that is the only square to check from. Have a look what happens when you check from that square. King g6. Let's try and check again. Actually, the problem is that it's just an amazing sort of dilemma. Diagonal's covered, but there's no checks. And then you go back to this sequence. Got to get the bishop out of the way to cover across the second rank. You check with the knight. And basically got to give the queen up. So that's pretty bad. Very strange. That slightly different queen position. White would have had all the checks he needed, but the way he played, he actually ran out of checks very quickly. That was advantage Karjakin. Next game, Carlsen won. There wasn't a noticeable blunder in it, according to my sort of filtering and specification. So now we're going to shoot forwards to tiebreak game number 3. Let me just bring up the chart. Okay, we've got a disposition. Everything's kind of okay. And bishop f1, first slight inaccuracy by Karjakin. Rook a2. See, this is threats across the second rank. And then maybe moves rook b1. But Karjakin, obviously under extreme time pressure, played rook takes c7. And have a quick look at his position, see if he can move. Yeah, it's rook to a1, skewing the queen and the bishop. So game over. Now, actually, I just realized I can actually look at tiebreak game number 2 as well. So let me bring up that quickly. Okay, bottom right chart, you can see what's happened there. This game was Carlsen had a decent advantage through most of the game. Karjakin defended excellently, but then there's this bobble, move 72. So let's have a look what's going on there. Decisions drawn. Rook b7 is a mistake. Carlsen played bishop d6, game went on, ended up a draw. So let's have a look at what the winning line here would be. See why there's a winning. Bishop e6 check, add variation. Only one move. Now play bishop f8, threatening nasty. So the rook has to stay on the 7th rank. But the problem is that you do a move like that, and you just stick the bishop in the way. 8 is coming. Obviously, the rook sacrifice itself. You've got 2 pawns, so you don't have a rook bishop corner. In fact, the dark square bishop is the right color. So the suggested alternative is just throwing that pawn forwards. Take it first, throwing another pawn forwards. We can do what we just said, but actually f6 is quicker. According to the hand, he takes f6, bishop f7, takes f7, king takes, and we have luckily, this position we have bishop, whereas in the actual game, Karjakin forced to draw by leaving Carlsen with the wrong colored bishop. Okay, so that was this very big potential turnaround in this game. Anyway, Carlsen won the next tiebreak as at game 3. And that was over. Okay, good. So I hope you found that enjoyable. These were, quite subtle, quite, moves or mistakes or inaccuracies, which hardly deserve the title of blunder. And next time around, I said 2018, that will be Carlsen and Karjakin. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.